Hi guys, today I have a really exciting video, and that is my favorite books of 2021. I read so much this year. It's been my best reading year to date, which is really exciting, and I read so many really good books. I had a really hard time kind of paring down this list. I went through all my 5-star reads, and then even from then I tried to kind of go, okay, well, what was my favorite out of those? So I have narrowed it down to a semi-reasonable stack to share with you guys. Before I jump into that, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, which is so exciting, and that is Ana Luisa. I have seen their stuff all over BookTube. Some of my favorite booktubers are also sponsored by Ana Luisa, so when they reached out to me to do a video for them, I was so just blown away. It's been a really fun year here on BookTube, and this channel has grown so much, and I never would have thought at the beginning of the year when I started this channel that I would have such an exciting sponsorship opportunity. But yeah, so the people at Ana Luisa were so kind to send me a couple pieces of their jewelry to share with you guys, and to also let you know that they are currently running their biggest sale of the year, which is buy one, get one 60% off their jewelry, which is insane. It's the perfect time of year to pick up some gifts for loved ones, sort of last minute, or even a gift for yourself. I love their jewelry. I think it is so dainty and elegant, and their whole mission statement is really awesome as well. So just to quickly share what they sent me, I'm really excited because a couple of these are pieces that were specifically designed by fellow booktubers, and I just love them so much. So I'm currently wearing the Hannah necklace, who again is right here on BookTube. She's really big, and I love this design. It's gold plated with some opal and this really pretty dainty flower on the inside, and I love gold jewelry. I think it is, especially in the fall and winter, it just feels so festive and warm, and this piece I think will go with a lot of what I wear. I especially love the turtleneck and dainty gold chain look, so that's really cute. I'm also wearing their Elios Huggy Hoops with these cute little dainty stars, which again I feel just screams Christmas and New Year's. And I also picked up the Noel necklace, which is this beautiful little hand with a little gemstone kind of coming off the index finger. And this was designed by Noel Gallagher, who is also here on BookTube. So excited to have these pieces from Ana Luisa. And they come in these cute little teal cloth pouches that I feel could be reused for a lot of things. Even if you're traveling, this would be a great way to bring your jewelry along. And I love that it's cloth because it's sustainable. It's not plastic packaging that you're just gonna throw away. And that's a really big part of Ana Luisa's sort of mission statement and their sort of company ideology. They use recycled materials, and they are completely carbon and water neutral, which, especially with jewelry, I feel is really rare. You know, a lot of these luxury companies aren't always quite so earth conscious. One thing that's really important to me when picking out jewelry, especially earrings, is that the jewelry is nickel free and hypoallergenic. My ears are really sensitive, so Ana Luisa's jewelry is made with all nickel free and hypoallergenic materials. They use gold-plated brass, gold-plated sterling silver, and lab-grown diamonds in all of their jewelry. So yeah, I'm really so excited that they reached out to me. I love their jewelry, and it's really exciting to get reached out to by a sponsor that you love their products and you're really excited to talk about them. So yeah, strongly encourage you guys to check them out. They're running their biggest sale of the year, and it's perfect timing for the holiday season. It's buy one, get one 60% off. So seriously, check them out. I know I'm going to be looking through their jewelry and adding to my collection because they have so many beautiful pieces. All right, and with that, let's get into the actual books. These aren't in any super particular order, maybe kind of chronological, because I was referring to my Goodreads as I was pulling them. So jumping right into it, we're gonna start off with a book that I read back in January, and that is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I have come to love V.E. Schwab in the past year. My first book that I read by her was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and it is now one of my favorite books. So I was really excited to jump into her backlist, and I started with Vicious, and I think about this book so much still, almost a year later. This story follows a young man named Victor and his best friend Eli, and they are about to graduate college, and they're working on their thesis statement, their master's thesis, and Eli really wants to investigate what is known as EOs, or extraordinaries, people with superpowers. It's more of like a conspiracy theory, but he wants to see if there's any sort of scientific cause for these powers. And Victor's really intrigued by this. They sort of have like a frenemies relationship. I know V.E. Schwab mentions that she was really inspired by the relationship from Cowboy Bebop between Spike Spiegel and Vicious. And you can definitely see that come through in this book. So these two young men end up developing superpowers, and their lives sort of drastically diverge from there. They come to have very different ideologies about how these powers should be handled and who should wield this power. There's a lot of jumping back and forth in time, but I think the way V.E. Schwab handles it is so masterful, and none of these characters are good, but you can't help rooting for them anyways, or at least some of them. I don't think that's easy to do, so I'm really impressed with the character work in this, and this needs to be an adaptation already. This should be a movie. It feels like superhero-y enough to be like a Marvel thing, but like more rooted in reality. And I think with the popularity of superhero content, this would be a great fit for sort of pop culture at the moment. So anxiously awaiting the day this becomes a movie or a TV series, because this was one of my favorite reads of this year. And again, I think about it a lot. My boyfriend and I just watched the Cowboy Bebop live adaptation on Netflix, and like I was just constantly thinking of this book because you could really see and feel sort of that inspiration. And again, I loved this book, and I cannot wait to read more of V.E. Schwab's works. Next up, we have Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I listened to this on audio, and I know this is a pretty popular sort of opinion, but the audiobook for this is amazing, and I strongly recommend, like, that's how you read this or, like, consume this. I'm sure the physical reading experience is great as well, but this is written in an interview format, and the audiobook is, like, a full cast, so it sounds like you're listening to, like, an actual documentary or podcast or something about this 70s rock band, and it was just so engrossing. And I don't normally listen to audiobooks while I'm at work. I typically listen to them on my commute, but like I could not stop listening to this. And as the title suggests, this story follows a young woman named Daisy Jones and this band that she ends up joining called The Six, and sort of like a retrospective look at the creation of their one album that sort of took the world by storm. Taylor Jenkins Reid has really made a name for herself, I think, in doing historical fiction, and I felt like I was reading about a real band. Like, it felt so real, and the characters that she wrote felt like real people. They were flawed in such a realistic way, you know, it doesn't over-glamorize the rock star life. She really delves deep into, like, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of it all, and yeah, this was so interesting, and this is currently being turned into an adaptation, which I think is so perfect, because the one thing that was missing from the audiobook experience was the music. They talk about the songwriting process so thoroughly in this book. It felt weird to like not have that in like actual songs and music included in the audiobook, but I totally understand why they didn't. So I'm really so excited to see what the adaptation does with sort of the music, and it feels very Fleetwood Mac-y, but I'm curious to see what direction they go in for the show. Loved this book. It is sort of part of the Taylor Jenkins Reid universe that a lot of her books are sort of starting to be written in, which I think is interesting. It's very subtle, you know, all of her books are standalones so far, but they all connect to each other in a really interesting way, and I really enjoy that. Definitely my favorite book by her so far. I've read this one, Evelyn Hugo, and Malibu Rising, and this was my first one, and it's still my favorite. I think part of that is the content. I really like the music industry, and 70s rock especially is really cool, and yeah, so this was one of my favorite books from the beginning of the year as well. Delving more into some fantasy reads, I picked up The Boneshard Daughter by Andrea Stewart this year. This was a Christmas gift from my boyfriend last Christmas, and I believe this came out in November of 2020. This is a fairly recent release, and the sequel literally just came out. I haven't read it yet because I asked for it for Christmas again, so I haven't been able to buy that one. But I'm so excited because this was such a unique and captivating fantasy story, and like unlike anything I've ever read. It's a multi-POV story that takes place in sort of an Eastern-inspired world, but not like entirely. And we follow several characters, one being Lynn, who is the Boneshard emperor's daughter, and she is sort of being trained by her father to take over the empire at some point, but she has this huge gap in her memory that would prevent her from being a successful empress herself. So he's sort of threatened that, like, if she can't regain her memories, this other guy is gonna come in and be emperor. So she is fighting like tooth and nail to uncover her memory and also master Boneshard magic, which is such a unique and cool magic system. Oh my gosh. I've never read anything like this. And using Boneshard magic, the wielder of it can sort of create these Frankenstein constructs and give them commands, like, written in the bones that help them sort of serve their master, and it is just so cool. It's such an interesting idea, and it honestly feels a little sci-fi-y in that way, because again, it's sort of Frankenstein-y. So that was a really cool element of this story. We also follow this man named Jovis, who's kind of a smuggler, pirate guy. He sort of unwillingly becomes a hero despite himself. He just wants to find his missing wife, but he ends up saving children, and songs get written about him, and he gets this really cool animal companion who I can't even begin to describe, because again, very unique set of abilities. But yeah, he becomes this hero sort of despite his best efforts, really. And it's really interesting to see how his influence sort of travels across the empire, and sort of his reputation precedes him in a really funny, entertaining way. And we also have a couple other sort of point of views as well, and they all sort of end up connecting by the end, or you start to see the relevance of all of them connecting with each other's stories by the end, and it's so good. I actually have a whole review video. It was one of my first ones I did on this channel, so it is kind of old, but I am much more thorough about my thoughts and the plot of this in that video, so strongly recommend you check that out if you're curious about this. This, again, was one of my favorite fantasy reads of this year. I am so excited to delve into the sequel because I think there's so much potential for this world, and I think Andrea Stewart has done something just so unique in the fantasy space, and I cannot wait to see what she does next because this was so good. Next up, we have our first YA fantasy of this list, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I have a whole reading vlog about this book in which I'm just gushing the entire time because the reading experience for this book was amazing. The characters and the plot work were so good. I was invested from the very beginning in Bree and her story, and just this sort of like Arthurian secret society Tracy Deonn created for this book. It was so captivating, and I had so much freaking fun reading it. There's also a bit of a competition element, which is really fun, and these trials that Bree is doing are so entertaining, and just like, you're scared for her, but you know she's gonna be okay because she's our protagonist. But yeah, I realized I just jumped over the entire sort of summary of this book, so let me backtrack here. This book follows Bree, whose mother unfortunately has just passed away in sort of like a mysterious way. Bree is still very much grieving her, but she gets this opportunity to sort of do like this early college experience thing. She's only like 16 or 17 at the beginning of this, but she's able to go to, I believe it's UNC Chapel Hill, that's right, and start her college experience. And while she's there, she starts to notice some weird stuff, particularly with like monsters and demons and these kids running around fighting them. And she's like, what the heck is this about? She starts to suspect that it might have something to do with her own mother's death because she feels something familiar about what's happening. And that's how she ends up getting wrapped up in this King Arthur's secret society. Oh my gosh, if you have any interest in Arthurian legend, pick this book up. It is so good. Yeah, again, this just had like so many elements that I really love in fiction, especially young adult fantasy. It was such a fun read, and the sequel for this also comes out very soon, I believe in the next 6 months, called Blood Mart. So excited for that one. I think Tracy Deonn just created really captivating characters that you couldn't help but root for. There is a very fun, well, not fun for them probably, but fun for me reading it, love triangle, and I love that. This was probably, out of the rest of the YA books on this list, this was my favorite. Again, the reading experience for this was just so fun, and I was really impressed with this, especially where this is a debut novel. It felt really thorough, and it didn't brush over a lot of the magic and stuff like I think YA kind of tends to do. It really took its time in building this world and this sort of Arthurian legend thing happening. For a book that takes place in our own world, I think Tracy Deonn did a really great job of creating this sort of secret world that's happening underneath the surface, and it was just so fun. Loved this book. The next couple I'm going to talk about sort of together because they are books 1 and 2 in a series, and that is Fireborn and its sequel, Flamefall by Rosaria Munda. Fireborn was actually a 4-star read for me, but Flamefall was so good it felt like wrong to leave it off this list. And these two books follow a Russian Revolution-esque plot, but with dragons, which is the combination I didn't know that I needed. In our first book, Fireborn, we meet Leo and Annie, and Leo is sort of he's kind of an Anastasia figure. He comes from royalty, but his family was overthrown in this very brutal revolution in which, like, his family was, like, murdered in front of him, and he is the last surviving son, like, of his family line. He makes it out of this revolution sort of unscathed against all odds and ends up in this orphanage in which he meets Annie, who is a fellow orphan, but from a completely different side of life. She is a peasant, basically. This orphanage really puts them on an equal playing ground. They're both quite young when this happens, like 5 or 6, I believe, and they become fast friends. Leo has to unlearn a lot about sort of his nobility and his entitlement in becoming friends with Annie, and also trying to hide his identity because he knows if anyone finds out who he is, the new political leaders will have him killed. And before the revolution, the lords of this land held power by using dragons, both riding them and, using them against peasants and stuff when necessary. And in this new political regime, the leaders allow everyone to see if they can sort of spark a connection with a dragon and become dragon riders themselves, which again puts I've been saying Leo and I believe he goes by Lee actually, which again puts Lee and Annie on similar sort of playing ground. They both become dragon riders for this new regime, and they have this really touching, if not complex and nuanced relationship. And in this book, they're starting to realize that the new regime is not entirely sort of without fault. Lee especially holds a lot of resentment, but he does actually believe in this political cause. He doesn't think that, lords should be the only ones having dragons and that peasants shouldn't have any power at all. Like, he actually does really believe in the heart of this regime, but again, he's starting to realize that it might be a little, corrupt. I thought this was such an amazing and complex story. I think if you like Game of Thrones and How to Train Your Dragons, somewhere in between the tones of those two stories lies Fireborn, and I loved it. Flamefall really even took that main story and improved on it. Lee and Annie sort of find themselves on not quite opposite, but like they start having different ideologies from one another, and there's this other character named Griff who sort of enters the fold and just adds so much to the story. And as frustrating as some of the characters can be, like, you understand why they're acting the way they are given their backgrounds. And I think Rosaria Munda did a really good job of that. It's not black and white. And I think she's done a really great job of creating a YA story that, again, has some complexity and nuance to it, especially in wartime or in a political sort of upheaval. It's easy to go, those are the good guys, these are the bad guys, but she doesn't shy away from showing the shades of gray, and I think that is a really special thing in the YA fantasy space right now. So I love these books. They're so fun. It does drive me a little insane that the covers do not match, but it is what it is. I do like the direction they've gone in so far with this one. I am hoping the third book comes out soon because I need to know what happens. It left off on quite the cliffhanger. But yeah, if you like political fantasy at all, I definitely recommend picking these up. The dragon riding is a big part of it, but maybe not quite as big as some people would expect. I have seen reviews where people were disappointed with the lack of like connection between the dragons and their riders, and there's definitely a connection there, but it is not the central part of the story by any means. So this is political fantasy first, dragon riding second, but I think they're lovely books and some of the best dragon fantasy I've read in a really long time. Next up is another YA fantasy, and it's a book that I buddy read with my best friend, which makes it all the more special in my heart, honestly. I had such a great time reading this with her. I have a reading vlog in which we're reading it together, and I mentioned on there that I think it is just, I'm so grateful we read this together because it is a type of story that we both really enjoy so much, and that is Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This story follows a young princess named Shiori and this curse she ends up sort of getting put upon her, and it's a fairy tale retelling, which I have not read the original fairy tale, but this was such a good story. I'm definitely curious in going back and reading that now. She finds herself sort of with a bowl, like an enchanted bowl stuck on her head, and she's not allowed to speak to anybody because for every word that she says, one of her brothers, her 6 brothers who were turned into cranes, will die. And so she has to find a way to get back to the palace and break this curse without her brothers dying. And this was so good. It was like a Disney story, honestly. I need this to be an animated movie like stat because I think it would just be so perfect for that. I could just picture it in my head as I was reading, and oh my gosh, this was just so enchanting. I will say this probably feels the most YA out of the YA books on this list, but not in a bad way. Again, in like a very Disney animated movie kind of way. There's a romance, there's an enchanted, again, there's the curse, there's the brothers turning into cranes, there is a dragon who can take a human form, and yeah, there's just like so many great elements in this book, and it was so much fun to read. I flew through this. I also listened to the audiobook, which was a very good experience. I think the narrator did a really good job of capturing all the characters, which I think can be difficult, especially like with as many characters as there are in this, between Shiori and her 6 brothers alone, and then there's all these other supporting characters. To find a unique voice for all of those is, I don't know how they do it, but it was impressive. This is the Fairy Loot edition, which I'm so glad to have because it is beautiful and it is one of my favorite books that I read this year, and I very proudly display this on my shelf. And again, I have very fond memories of reading this with my best friend, so just really added to the whole experience. I think the story itself is still a 5-star, but like if I could give it an extra star for sort of my feelings towards it because of my experience, I would. But yeah, strongly recommend. I haven't read any other Elizabeth Lim books, but the experience I had reading this made me want to pick up Spin the Dawn like immediately. I haven't yet, but I do own it, so hopefully that'll be coming soon. But loved this book. And then finally, we have a book that is one of my most anticipated reads of the year. As soon as I read his previous book, which came out last year, I needed this book in my life. They had just announced it, I think, when I picked up his previous book, and just the description for it, I was like, this sounds like a beautiful story. And that is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. His last book, The House in the Cerulean Sea, last year really blew up and sort of became a booktube darling. It was so wholesome and sweet, and that is one of my favorite books from last year. And I'm very happy to say that his writing holds up, and this is one of my favorite books from this year. It's a very different story from House in the Cerulean Sea, so if you're expecting that same sort of, there's definitely some like wholesome elements, but it tackles more themes of like grief and death, and it's a bit of a heavier read for sure, but I think he handled them beautifully. The story follows a lawyer named Wallace who dies rather suddenly, and upon his death is met by a Grim Reaper who brings him to this quaint little tea shop in the middle of the woods, and that's where he begins to suspect that he might actually be dead. Wallace was not a great person in life, and he spends his afterlife at this tea shop sort of trying to relearn his ways and become a better person, and the relationships that he forges between both himself and the Grim Reaper, as well as the ferryman that sort of helps him try to move on into the next sort of phase of the afterlife, really help him realize that like he was not a great guy and that he should be better. And it was just like a lovely story. I will say if you're interested in reading this, maybe don't read the flap, because I think that gives an element away that doesn't happen until like almost the very end, and I think it was a weird choice to include that in the flap. So if you know anything about this book, maybe unlearn it beyond what I've said, because I think that'll make the reading experience a bit better. But yeah, this was a lovely book. I just want to read everything by TJ Klune now. Like, his stories just have so much heart to them. Even though this was a heavier read, it still felt like warm and fuzzy despite that. I think that's sort of a difficult balance to try to maintain, but he did a lovely job, and this is one of my favorite books, and I'm really excited because this was one of my anticipated 5-star reads, and it was a 5-star read. All right, and so those were my favorite reads of 2021. Obviously, the year's not quite over yet, but I wanted to get this up before the new year because I have a lot of videos planned for January. But yeah, I am so thrilled with my reading year. There have been some duds here and there, but overall I've had a very consistently good year. I've read so many amazing books. And like I said in the beginning of the video, I had a really hard time trying to like narrow the list down so I wasn't just talking about all the books that I read this year, basically. But yeah, let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these or what were your favorite reads of 2021. Definitely open to recommendations for 2022. And once again, thank you to the sponsor of this video, Ana Luisa. Don't forget to check out the link below and shop their site for buy one, get one 60% off. I, again, will definitely be checking that out. I'm so excited about that. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Feel free to like the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and have a lovely day. Bye.